as a lawyer representing cyclists, pedestrians, people riding small electric devices around the city, I really see how Uber and other e-hail companies have transformed our transportation system, especially in urban centers like New York City. There was a time when it was really just drivers, many of whom owned their own cars. They were owner-operators. They were heavily regulated, but they were required to have a certain amount of accountability for what they were doing. And it was a viable living for the operators of cars for hire. And they wanted to make a living of it, a career of it, and it was a chance for them to do so, primarily immigrant, but not exclusively. And now it seems that all of the excess value that's generated by offering car for hire services is being sucked out of that economy by the e-hail operators, primarily Uber, which is the 800-pound gorilla. There's a few others that really operate essentially on the same system. But I'm going to talk about Uber because they are clearly the market leader, right? And they come up in cases all the time. And part of that is just because cars for hire have always been a part of traffic crashes and traffic violence here in New York City. Cars for hire are out there driving on the streets all the time. There are factors that are distracting the operators of cars for hire, like looking for a fare or looking for a pickup or a discharge point. There's also just, the commercial incentive to drive a bit faster to be able to get that many more rides in, right? So you have commercial car service activity. It needs to be heavily regulated, but you had a personal stake in the business, I think under the older model, pre-e-hail. Now, with Uber and the other operators, all the money's getting sucked out, and these drivers have to really hustle in order to make a living. And the way they do it is they work on the app. Everything they do is coming at them from the app, and you always see them on their phones. What's the next fare I can pick up? How do I choose amongst the fares I might select, and which ones might generate a bigger tip for me or a more convenient route or help me avoid traffic? They have this sort of gamified work environment that is controlled 100% by the designers of the app. And let me tell you, this has turned into be a big problem, right? So I have a case against Uber right now where what they're doing is disclaiming any responsibility for what their app is telling the driver to do in turn-by-turn instructions. We have video from inside the cabin of the Uber operator's car when he's going to the pickup saying, make a U-turn and pick up Ariani, who I guess is the passenger he was supposed to go pick up. Well, the spot where the app told the driver to make the U-turn has a big sign with a U and a slash through it circled. We all know what that means. No U-turn, right? And that's Uber's defense in the case. Yeah, our app told the driver, make a U-turn and pick up Ariani, but he's a professional. Let me tell you something. People rely on navigation systems nowadays. It's one thing if the driver, doesn't pay attention to the traffic around him, and that's what happens here. And the driver is, of course, in part responsible because he made a U-turn. He was looking for Ariani over his left shoulder. He wasn't looking at the oncoming traffic that he was making a U-turn across illegally, and he hit my guy in the bike lane. All right, so clearly the driver should have, been more professional, less negligent in making that turn. But does Uber get off and get to walk away? Uber, who's making the bulk of the profit off of providing that car service, and get to say, oh, it's all on the driver. He's a professional. Everyone knows you can't rely on instructions that come through routing software. That's ridiculous. We have all come to rely on Google Maps and Apple Maps and all the different apps that are giving us turn-by-turn navigation to get where we need to go. And if it is a plausible instruction that you are getting from the app to make a turn, you don't necessarily see the sign. It creates a risk that you will not be looking at the sign, particularly if you're a commercial driver who's being directed to find your fare as quickly as possible, and from what I hear, getting penalized if you don't pick up your fare fast enough. When I tried to do that same driver's route using Google Maps, it was a 10-minute detour. because there are no U-turns allowed anywhere near that spot where the Uber app told the driver to make the U-turn. But Uber doesn't want those customers to have to wait to 10 minutes. They could cancel the ride and decide they want to use Lyft or some other e-hail service, some other way to get home, right? So Uber has a commercial incentive to get the drivers to cut the corners, and they have their app telling the drivers to cut those corners. They're not allowed to just say, oh, that's not us, when the driver gets caught doing the illegal things that I suspect Uber app is telling drivers to do every minute of every day. Those wild style sweeping U-turns you see cars for hire making in New York, up where I live at 125th Street, on Houston Street, all over the city. I think a lot of those are pursuant to direct orders from the Uber app. Well, Uber says that they don't give drivers orders. Drivers are professional and they're 100% responsible for what they do. That is just not reality-based. That is not how the drivers are operating. That is not how the drivers can make a living in this business, which if you can't make a living, you won't do the work, okay? They took away the old owner-operator model of cars for hire in New York, taxi cab operators who had their own medallion and a hack license. Now that these drivers are they're supposed to take all the risk of liability from a dangerous enterprise operating a car service in New York City, and Uber's supposed to take all the profit and bear none of the responsibility when they direct a driver to do something illegal and make a U-turn into the bike lane. That's ridiculous. And let me tell you, I think Uber is aware that people see they are not treating people like human beings. You know, I did a reel on Instagram, got over 1 million views. I was talking about how Uber is forcing people into binding arbitration, people who've been hurt seriously by Uber, because maybe one time years ago they might have ordered through Uber Eats and they downloaded the app and they agreed to the service conditions and the service agreement, and it says, oh, forevermore, I'll never take Uber to court. I'll just go to arbitration. Well, people heard that, and they're saying in the comments to that reel, they're going to take Uber off their phones. And they should, because a company that doesn't treat their customers like human beings, that's a problem. That's not a winning business model, and I think Uber's starting to get the message.